It was hard to concentrate when facing literally everything, ever, all at once, Tom and in a state of utter havoc, and yet, Sunny tried. He had already achieved something astonishing by enduring the terrible visage of fate without being reduced to a mindless husk. But now, he needed to do something even more unimaginable. He had to actually fathom fate in its endless complexity. Of course, that was impossible. Even augmented by Mind Weave, Sunny was not at all capable of doing something like that. No one was, really. Even Weaver, the demon of fate, could not grasp all of its strings, although they seemed to have gotten pretty close to it. Sunny had to do the opposite. Instead of trying to comprehend all of fate, he had to learn how to limit himself to only perceiving a small fraction of it. That, at least, was something he could potentially manage. In a sense, what Sunny was trying to achieve was the opposite of what he had been trying to do all these years. Ever since becoming a sleeper, Sunny had been teaching himself how to expand the scope of his mind, first to perceive the world from 2 points of view at the same time, then from 7, and finally from thousands of them. Ironically enough, now that he had finally achieved the latter thanks to Mind Weave, he had to narrow the scope of his mind instead. So, that was what Sunny endeavored to do. It wasn't easy, especially because he had to contend against the crushing pressure and the stunning torment of beholding the great tapestry of fate. In that state, simply forming cohesive thoughts was a challenge, let alone guiding them in a desired direction. However, Sunny was actually helped by the fact that he had just returned from the waking world. After enduring its suppression for an extended period of time, he felt at ease and liberated in the dreadful expanse of the dream realm. The relief he felt equalized the pressure he was subjected to, somewhat, and the task of resisting the latter felt familiar. All this effort, just to bury my head in the sand like an ostrich. Whatever the hell an ostrich was. Slowly, gradually, Sunny felt himself growing blind to the vastness of fate. The daunting visage of the great tapestry was still there, all around him, but it was as if Sunny had developed tunnel vision. The confines of his perception were broad at first, then grew narrow. Eventually, he managed to limit the scope of his vision to only those strings of fate that pierced the night garden. But even that was too much. So, he focused and made himself blind to more of them, to the fates of millions of mundane people aboard the Titanic ship, of the awakened warriors, of the nightmare creatures whose fates ended when they touched the living bulwark of the giant ship's hull, anything and everything that had become a part of the night garden recently. Only then did Sunny manage to let out a relieved sigh. There were still numerous strings of fate around him, most of them tangled and torn, but at least their number was not inconceivable anymore. More than that, Sunny felt like he gained a measure of control over the "where is my eye" enchantment. Before, it had both shown him the strings of fate and forced the knowledge of them upon him. But now, he could perceive them without knowing them, could behold a fraction of the great tapestry of fate without drowning in it. Updates are released by Novel FireNet. It was as if an invisible wall was standing between him and the overwhelming knowledge, or rather, a door. One that he could, most likely, open at will. He just had to find a way to do it. Sunny remained motionless for a while, thinking. There were countless strings of fate around him, piercing all of existence and stretching into infinity. Some of them were dim, while some seemed to shine like rays of incandescent starlight. He was searching for a particular glow, though. He was searching for the string of fate made out of pure golden light, like the one that had led him to the Ebony Tower and Weaver's severed arm all those years ago. Soon enough, he found it. It wasn't very difficult, because the radiant golden string was right in front of him. There were others like it, as well. After all, the golden hue must have signified a connection to divine beings, and the night garden was a mythical vessel, but he felt especially drawn to this one. Now, I just need to follow that string to the hidden spot where Weaver had left their lineage. But he couldn't. That was because the golden string did not seem to lead anywhere in particular. Instead of stretching to a certain area on the colossal ship, it simply pieced its hull, as if connected to the night garden itself. Sunny frowned behind Weaver's mask. What is that supposed to mean? He hesitated for a while, and then did something he had never considered doing before. Following an impulse, he reached forward. and grasped the string of fate in his hand. To Sunny's relief, his fingers did not turn to ash, and neither were they severed. Most amazingly of all, they did not simply pass through the thread of golden light, they grasped it tightly, as if touching a physical object. He could feel the very fabric of fate under his fingertips, which tingled slightly. It was only then that Sunny finally understood the nature of the changes that consuming Weaver's lineage had caused to his mind, body, and soul. He used to think that the odd quirks of the Weaves were meant to make him adept at Weaver's unique sorcery. Blood Weave had given him the ability to see the strings of essence, Bone Weave had allowed him to touch them, Flesh Weave had made it so he was not cut by them, Mind Weave had allowed him to fathom the endless intricacies of spell weaves. However, at that moment, he realized that it was all no more than a side effect, that it was merely a prelude. The true purpose of these alterations was this. It was the ability to interact with the strings of fate. Damnation. As Sunny's fingertips slid across the surface of the golden thread, he shuddered. Because, through touch, he saw a glimpse of the fate contained within it. Suddenly, his mind went elsewhere. Sunny saw a vast wasteland resting under a blue sky. At its heart, a young sapling struggled as it fought against the crushing pressure of soil, dreaming of light. Soon, it broke free of its dark, nurturing cradle and bathed in the radiance, absorbing the warmth of the sun and being caressed by the winds. Eventually, the young sapling grew into a mighty tree, towering above the surrounding desert. Its roots spread far and wide, reaching deep into the earth, its branches stretched toward the clouds, swaying as they wished to touch them. New chapters are published on novifire.net. The tree bore wondrous fruit, and, attracted by their scent, creatures came from far away to taste them, gods and spirits, beasts and titans, and humans, too, dressed in furs and carrying tools made of flint, to satiate their hunger, and fill the emptiness in their hearts. Time passed, and the wasteland was no more. Instead, a great forest covered its desolate expanse, full of vibrancy and life. Countless beings populated its verdant depths, living at peace with each other. There was no hunger and no strife, no discord or violence among those who dwelled in the garden of bliss, only harmony. The tree had grown tremendously tall. Its roots dug deep into the earth, reaching the soothing darkness of the shadow realm, its branches stretched high into the sky, basking in the light of heaven. The entire forest was born of it, and was part of it, the roots of all trees there were intertwined, forming a single, great being. And all was fine. Until the cold winds came. Slowly, gradually, an eerie coldness encroached upon the forest from the west. First came the cold, then came the snow, and once the snow began falling, it never stopped. Soon, great mounds of it obscured everything in sight, the sky became hidden, and a relentless blizzard raged across the world, encasing everything in ice. The leaves of the verdant trees froze and shattered, their bark blackened and cracked, and olden fruits did not grow on their branches anymore. The dwellers of the forest endured for as long as they could, but eventually, pursued by the relentless cold and hunger, they fled their homes and burrows, hoping to find salvation from the cold and distant lands, abandoning the blissful garden. Eventually, the forest became frozen and empty. The great tree at its heart was still alive, encased in ice, but powerless to break it. All it could do was dream of light, of warmth, of being young and strong once more. That was when a beautiful demon appeared, her eyes as blue as the warm summer sky. The vicious cold was banished by her will. The icy carapace that encased the world melted. The long age of snow and hunger the eerie cold had caused came to an end, and soon, new saplings rose from the nurturing soil, brimming with green leaves, dreams of sunlight and life. Having been given the gift of repose by the beautiful demon, the forest was restored and reborn. The great tree was rejuvenated. Since then, winter came every year, but it was followed by spring every year, as well. Life continued. That was the vision Sunny saw, but he saw a different vision at the same time, as well. At first, it was largely the same. But then, its essence subtly changed. The great forest still sprawled under the warm sky. Countless beings still dwelled in its verdant depths, and they still knew no hunger or strife, only peace. But there was no harmony in that peace. Instead, there was only stagnation and horror. The numerous trees grew uncontrollably, cannibalizing each other's roots and killing their siblings in a desperate competition for a spot under the sun. The ground was covered in myriad layers of dead branches, brown leaves, and fallen fruit, all of that endless mass rotting in the sweltering heat of the eternal forest. The beasts and the humans who knew neither hunger nor strife propagated endlessly, but their minds grew weaker and more feeble with each genera. With no need to fight for anything, they had no need to strive and develop, and as a result, both their minds and their bodies gradually degraded. Eventually, their numbers grew so vast that even the boundless resources of the great forest could not sustain them anymore. So, in their endless hunger, they turned to endlessly devouring each other, their blood and bones becoming inexhaustible fertilizer for the growing trees. Their lives and deaths nourishing the roots of the great tree and satisfying its own boundless, frightening, insatiable hunger. Fueled by it, the great tree continued to grow, and grow, and grow endlessly and hunger endlessly, forever. Until a stunning demon appeared, her eyes as blue as the cold winter ice. A vicious cold was summoned by her will. It encroached upon the primordial forest from the west, followed by a raging blizzard. Once the snow began falling, it did not stop until the whole world was covered in it, suffocating the forest and encasing the great tree in a prison of ice. With no warmth to find anywhere and no fruit to gather, the forest dwellers fled its barren expanse and scattered across the realms. The Garden of Hunger stood empty, devoid of life. Only the great tree remained, covered in ice and suffering from hunger. The stunning demon then climbed its branches, and spoke to it. After a while, the snow melted, and the ice melted as well. New saplings sprouted from the ground, and verdant life returned to the rejuvenated land. The forest grew anew. But ever since then, winter would always come, putting an end to summer. And thus, the world would get a chance to rest from its hunger, from the boundless hunger of life to grow and expand. Sunny swayed, failing to digest the jumbled mess of images that had assaulted his mind. He let out a pained groan, raising one hand to grasp his aching head. Then, he moved his fingers further along the thread of golden light. When he did, a new vision revealed itself to him. The vision of the great tree suffering from a dreadful curse. Sunny saw the vibrant forest once again, this time long after the demon of repose had created the cycle of seasons. The great tree, the avatar of Heart God, was different, as well. Instead of hungering for exponential growth, it stood like a pillar that supported both heaven and earth, immutable and stable in its towering glory. The branches of the tree were like a world in and of itself, with human cities built on their weathered surface. The people did not wear furs or use flint weapons anymore, having mastered much more sophisticated tools and developed an elaborate culture, which hinted that he was not seeing the dawn of times anymore. This had to be the age of heroes, the era of mortal champions fighting against the corrupted creatures for dominance over the world. That struggle was happening somewhere far away, though, in the mortal realms. The void could not exert its influence in the heart realm, and therefore, there could be no corruption in the sacred forest. Which was why it was so startling to see the world tree falling sick. This chapter is updated by novelfire.net. A virulent rot spread through its trunk and its branches, turning vast blotches of the weathered bark dark. The golden sap had turned into torrents of abhorrent black pus, flowing from the rotting valleys and raining down on the distant ground. The golden fruits were devoured by gargantuan maggots, and human champions banded into armies to resist the horrors born of them. The eternal leaves withered and fell, carried away by the wind. No matter how fiercely the humans resisted, the vile rot continued to spread, slowly devouring more and more of the tree over the course of many generations. The great tree itself tried to battle its sickness, as well, but the insidious disease continued to consume it from within, gradually spreading toward its roots. The great tree was a pillar of existence, holding up the heavens and supporting the earth, and that pillar was slowly crumbling. Sunny was terrified by the visage of the dying vessel of a god. It seemed unthinkable that an avatar of Heart God could have come that close to dying, long before being burned and toppled during the Doom War. Gods were great and ineffable, after all, they were supposed to be all but invulnerable, if not for the absolute law of imperfection they themselves had created. But perhaps the avatars of the gods were less so. In any case, Sunny felt a dark sense of curiosity while watching the world tree rot. He was trying to understand what the sickness ravaging it was. The spreading rot looked like corruption, what he imagined corruption would look like, if manifested as a physical force, but it was not. Instead, the vile disease was a living being. An unholy terror, a malevolent remnant of the age of chaos, or maybe an insidious curse uttered by a void creature whom the gods had slain. Not all of the chaos creatures had been sealed with the void, after all. Just like one of the gods ended up being trapped behind the seal, some of them had escaped it, the being whose death gave birth to the hollow mountains, for example, and whose blood became the source of true darkness. The gods had battled the remnant creatures of the void at the dawn of the age of gods, aided by the demons, and scars left behind by those primordial battles could still be found across the dream realm. The corrupted came later, but some of them grew just as powerful. Enough so, it seemed, that even an avatar of one of the gods could not resist this particular unholy terror, without help. And help it did receive. Answering Heart God's call, the demon of repose returned to the sacred forest once again. Ariel, the demon of dread, had defeated an unholy titan in combat once. But his sister did not battle the curse consuming the world tree, rather, she helped the great tree plunge into a state of endless rejuvenation, so that it could consume the disease devouring it instead. The WRLD tree rotted and grew anew. Its leaves fell, and new ones sprouted from emerging buds. The dead bark crumbled into dust, then was replaced by fresh growth. The diseased branches broke and fell, causing the world to quake when they impacted the earth, but new branches appeared in their place. Over, and over, and over again, without end. Rotting, dying, and being reborn again. Until the disease was no more. The unholy terror had perished, and the world tree regained its vitality. The cities of humans who had made home in its branches, however, were decimated. Most of them were destroyed, and those that remained became overgrown by leaves and bark, with not a soul in sight. The arrival of the demon of repose was a boon for the great tree, but it was an indescribable disaster to those who had lived in the shade of its leaves. A calamity that could not be escaped, predicted, or reasoned with. There was a reason, after all, why demons were feared above all other deities of ancient MS. Once the disease consuming the world tree was no more, the demon of repose left. However, it took payment for helping Heart God save their avatar. That payment was a young branch of the great tree. And from that branch, she fashioned a magnificent ship. A living ship that was more than a kilometer across from port to starboard, and many times its width and length. One that was like a city in and of itself, with dozens of decks, beautiful palaces, tall pagodas built on its surface, and great mysteries hiding in its boundless holds. A ship with wild groves, rushing streams, and deep lakes. The demon of repose named her ship the Night Garden, and made it her home. The world tree was long destroyed, and the demon of repose was dead. However, the Night Garden still remained, the last living sapling of once great forest. Enthralled by the breathtaking visions of the ancient past, Sunny slid his fingers further down the thread of golden light. Now, he understood why he had seen the birth of the world tree and the spread of the Heart God's sacred forest first. It was because the Night Garden had been made from the branch of the great tree, and was therefore a part of it, the last part of it, even. So, its fate was part of the world tree's fate, or had been once, at least. Marveling at that fact, Sunny opened himself to the truth of what events the Night Garden had experienced. It was difficult, delving into the meaning of the string of fate was not like reading a book. A gargantuan torrent of information was pouring into Sunny's strained mind, and he could only absorb a few drops of that crushing flood here and there. He did not immediately see another detailed vision of the past like the first two. Instead, what he saw were glimpses of various scenes, all jumbled and mixed together. The Night Garden sailing on a misty sea, the Night Garden battling a storm so ferocious that entire realms could have been washed away by it, the Night Garden moving across the great black void between the stars. And being moored on a titanic pier of a beautiful, awe-inspiring city built among the stars. That last glimpse seemed especially significant, somehow. Even consumed by the strain of staring at fate, Sunny could not help but feel a hint of bewildered amusement. Is Night Garden a spaceship, then? He spent a split second, which felt like an eternity, considering that fact. And then... wham! Sunny fell from the chair and slammed his head against the floor. Pulled away from his bewitched state, he belatedly retracted his hand and deactivated, "Where is my eye?" The world felt strange. The world felt too small, claustrophobic, and two-dimensional. Follow current novels on novelire.net. Time was most bizarre, somehow separated into 3 distinct states. The past, the PR. Ascent, and the future. The inexplicable division seemed nonsensical. Ouch. Laying on the floor, Sunny sensed the shadow of Jet move above him. He realized that she had struck him, overturning his chair and throwing him to the floor. "Why did you hit me?" Jet let out a bewildered laugh. "Gods. Have you seen yourself?" Sunny did not, in fact, see himself. Actually, he could not see anything at all. "What?" Jet fell heavily on her sofa. "For your information, there was smoke rising from beneath your mask. And the smell." She made a retching sound. "Well, I guess that's one more accomplishment under my belt." Making a dead woman retch was no simple feat. Belatedly, Sunny realized that he was drenched in sweat and could smell burned flesh. Dismissing Weaver's mask, he raised an arm, touched his face tentatively, and winced. His mind was still reeling from beholding the great tapestry of fate, so he felt dazed. That was a misleading word to describe his peculiar state, but he could not find a better one. Sunny was so dazed, in fact, that he did not even register the physical pain he was experiencing. But the area around his eyes was definitely burned. His eyes were burned, as well. Luckily, they were still there, just scorched and unable to see anything. "Ah. It seems that I've gone blind." He sighed. "How bothersome." With that, Sunny rose, brushed his clothes with a shaking hand, picked up his chair, and sat back down. Being blind was indeed a hassle, but he could function just fine with just shadow sense. More than that, his eyes had only received mild damage. It was only mild thanks to a timely whack from Jet, and with his regenerative abilities, he would be fine in a few days. Things could have been worse if he kept "Where is my eye?" active for a bit longer, though. "Wow. You look frightening." Jet shook her head. Sunny tilted his own a little, which almost caused him to lose balance and fall back to the floor. "Frightening?" She nodded. "It's like you have embers in your eyes. You are mostly black, with glowing orange cracks." "What the hell did you do?" Sunny remained silent for a while, then spoke in a subdued tone. "Well, I guess it was a divination, of sorts. In fact, being able to touch the strings of fate and catch glimpses of their meaning was eerily similar to Cassie's dormant ability. Sunny was willing to bet that if the great tapestry of fate was still intact, he would have been able to receive visions of the future, as well. "Huh. Does that make me an oracle, T00? He shivered. "A very extreme shape of divination. I was trying to determine where the thing I am looking for is." Jet seemed to have raised an eyebrow. Sunny was not sure, since he could only feel the motions of her shadow, and shadow, sadly, did not have eyebrows. "And did you?" Sunny scratched the back of his head. "Sort of. I saw a thread, but that thread did not lead me to any particular area of the ship. Instead, it just sort of disappeared into the ship, and if pointing to it as a whole, or maybe inside of it." Jet hesitated for a while. "You don't think that you'll have to be absorbed into the hull to find it, do you?" Sunny slowly shook his head. "That was my first thought, as well. But actually, I have a different idea." He considered it again, then thought back to the visions he had seen. "Yeah. It is worth trying." The night garden was a living thing. Not in the same sense as humans or animals were, but still one nonetheless. It had been made from a branch of the world tree and enchanted by the demon of repose to endlessly rejuvenate and restore itself. It was alive, but neither conscious nor sentient. But if it was indeed alive, then did it dream of anything? And could Sunny see what the Titanic ship was dreaming of? Of course, he could. After all, Sunny had a horse who could bring him into someone's dream. A storm raged outside. The sky was hidden behind a great dark veil of angry clouds, hurricane winds were ravaging the world, and the boundless sea rose up against the tyranny of heaven. The undulating expanse of fierce waves stretched endlessly in all directions, each of them towering like a rolling mountain. The night garden sailed through the storm, indomitable and dauntless. Illuminated by the colorful glow of countless lanterns, it was the only island of warmth and light in the world of cold darkness, apart from the branching bolts of lightning that descended from the roaring sky like silver arrows, that was, as if meant to punish the sea for its defiance. Instead of striking the sea, however, they were drawn to the masts of the night garden, making it seem as if the ancient vessel was surrounded by a radiant mantle of electric arcs as it battled the storm. Each colossal wave was like the wall of a great fortress, dwarfing the world with its imposing height. The bow of the Titanic ship, however, towered above them. It cut and crushed them like an unstoppable siege ram, moving forward at a steady pace. The violence of each impact was terrifying, the roaring thunderclaps were deafening, the flashes of lightning were blinding. Well, at least Sunny assumed they were. His eyes had not recovered yet, and he fled from the physical pain by abandoning his corporeal form to hide in Jet's shadow. She was in the runic hall of the main pagoda at the moment, deftly steering the ship in its voyage through the calamitous storm. The night garden had some defenses against the fury of the elements. There seemed to be an invisible barrier protecting the main deck of the Titanic ship, making the winds less powerful as they assaulted it and preventing the torrential rain from causing a flood, to the point that many people gathered outside, hiding beneath colorful oil-paper umbrellas to enjoy the view of the storm. However, that did not mean that the night garden was invulnerable. It could still be damaged, or even capsized, unless controlled by a steady hand. The bow of the ship had to be aimed at the waves, and it had to maintain a sufficient speed. Myriad things had to be considered, as well, to keep the passengers safe. Jet seemed to be handling the task just fine, aided by several surviving elders of the House of Night who acted as her advisors. The night garden was basking in the fury of the storm, replenishing its reserves of essence. Sunny could not see the stunning battle between the Titanic ship and the cataclysmic storm, but he could still sense its profundity. To him, it was a storm of shadows, vast and as deep as the sea. They flowed and roiled chaotically due to the unceasing barrage of lightning bolts and the passing of the Titanic ship. Observing the fury of the elements from the safety of Jet's shadow was strangely soothing. After a while, the noise of the storm receded into the background of his mind, and Sunny was left alone with his thoughts. He had a lot to think about. Nightmare was ready to take him into the dreams of the night garden, but Sunny did not want to venture into unknown territory before recovering his eyesight. So, until then, there was nothing for him to do except think. Beholding the great tapestry of fate had left a profound impression on him, even if it left him temporarily crippled. The damage to his eyes could have been worse, but it was not insignificant either. Sunny would remain weakened for a few days, and there were the invisible wounds to consider, too. Even now, his mental state was a bit strange. It was as if his mind had received a powerful shock, and was still a little numb as a result. Who knew what would happen to it if he peered into the fate often, and for prolonged periods of time? Come to think of it. Follow current novels on novelfire.net. Exploring the strings of fate was even more dangerous than Sunny thought. This time, he had seen the past of the night garden, which, unexpectedly, was intertwined with the past of the world tree, an avatar of heart god. He had seen the birth of the sacred forest and some of its long history, culminating in the creation of the Titanic ship by the demon of repose. But he could have just as easily stumbled onto visions of something that he was not meant to see. What would have happened to Sunny if he caught a glimpse of heart god battling the creatures of the void? What if he heard their profane names spoken aloud and was exposed to the forbidden knowledge of the void? Hidden in the shadows, Sunny trembled. The strings of fate stretched far into the past, to the very dawn of time, and even beyond it, to the age of chaos. That bygone era was a terrifying place, though. It was a time when man-eating giants struggled in the darkness, and that darkness was the only mercy offered to mortal men. If it was stripped and they beheld the hidden faces of the giants, the terror of the truth would drive them mad and haunt them till the end of days. So, Sunny could not peer into the past recklessly. Goodness! I really am an oracle now. He let out a mental chuckle. Still, it was a gift he could not refuse. The future was destroyed, but the ability to learn the secrets of the past alone was too important a boon. After all, knowledge was the origin of power, and even if there was a price to be paid for acquiring it, Sunny was ready to pay it. Because eventually, he was bound to delve into the darkness and face the man-eating giants personally. The ability to interact with the strings of fate had to become one of the tools in his arsenal. He just had to treat them with utmost caution, never reaching out to touch them recklessly. The strings of fate. Sunny remembered the sensation of the golden thread under his fingertips. Back then, he had only slid his fingers along its length. But could he do something else, too?